just want everybody to know that this event is being recorded. Give me 1 second for me to log onto my computer. Yes.
So that I'm not just a shadow of that.
That would be nice. Actually, it will give me 1 more minute for us to get started. Marjorie, can you go into my studio and get a desk lamp? If you just walk in, and to the right is a desk lamp right there. Yeah. Oh, but it's quite bright now, huh?
Yeah, it is bright.
Okay. All right. Being recognized? All right. Thank you guys all for coming. I really appreciate it. It is with great pleasure tonight that I introduce Gabriel Curry. Curry was born in Mexico City and spent the last 2 decades living and practicing in different parts of the Western world. It is through the eyes and the mind of an immigrant artist that we get to re-experience and recode the everyday object we often take for granted. He accepts his materials, granting them rights, insisting that a bottle of Coca-Cola, a disposed cigarette butt, or an inflated condom has as much right to be art materials as a sheet of metal or a chunk of clay. Curry does not claim that this is a new approach. His practice clearly acknowledges Duchamp, who opened our minds to the ready-made, Warhol to pop, minimal artists to mass-produced objects and industrial materials, art de povera to the everyday objects as materials, conceptual artists to the dematerialization, and Haim Steinbach, who opened our minds to shopping as a crucial component of a studio practice. Curry's work does not up the ante in the pool of art vocabularies set forth by these artists. Rather, his practice is that of wit, charm, and interplay of existing language in the history of art. Please allow me to indulge in a rather playful and kind of foolish read of his read for a brief moment. In the invited world of the artist, 3 avocados are attempting to deliver the news of the day after the '69 moon landing, or are they playing hide and seek? An inflated condom and a pair of rolled up socks are acting as referees in a fight between 2 rocks, or are they engaged in a sexual act? Another possible read of one of his sculptures, a head of plastic lettuce is being tickled by a gang of waiting ticket stubs. Or can it be that the stubs are going through an identity crisis and think that they are also lettuce leaves? Or, the or in the mentioned scenarios is where his work begins, hovers, and opens up potentials in the language of sculpture. In these sculptures, familiar things are caught in a semantic play. They are engaged in a polyvocal conversation, making room for misinterpretation and reinterpretations that along the way rewards the viewers with the concrete specificity of their position in a given culture. Curry accepts the socioeconomic conditions of his informed materials while taking a democratic approach, focusing on the form and the formal. His recent shows include exhibitions at the Aspen Art Museum, Bergen Kunsthall in Norway, the ICA in Boston, Whitechapel Gallery in London, Center for Pompidou in Paris, MUAC Contemporary University Museum in Mexico City, and his biennial activities include the 12th Havana Biennial, made in LA at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, the 10th Istanbul Biennial, and the 54th and the 50th Venice Biennial. Please help me in welcoming Gabriel Curry.
Hello, and thank you all for being here. I think the introduction has already been substantial. I have very little left by way of introducing myself, but I guess I still will, because I need to talk to you through a number of images. I prepared a lot of images for you, and I would hope that rather than me having to say so much, the images will also speak for, by themselves. I have actually done a great deal of work in the last few years, even if I think of the time that I had my exhibition here at the ICA in 2011, at the beginning of 2011. In these 6 years, I've done a lot of work. So I thought I should start by my most recent exhibition and then go back a little bit in order to try and cover some of my basic concerns as a sculptor. And I chose this recent exhibition not just because of its actuality, but also because of its ambition. Somehow I think is right at the heart of my practice in its aim to come forward as both engaged with material and also in its trying to enunciate of systems, or a greater system to which into which some subsystems fit into. This exhibition took place in London in a gallery called Sadie Coles, and it was called After Thought is Never Binary. These are some installation views, and as you see, there were works on the floor and works on the walls, and of varying materials. This is one of a number of boxes. I call them boxes rather than cubes, made with stainless steel, on which there were containers that had objects or materials. And I think of them both as recipients and also as dispensers. And that's one thing that is important about these pieces. They are there because they are giving out something, let's say, but naturally because they have these cups that are receded, you say, into the surface. That also means that they are recipients. In this case, this one's called Box 4-4, and what we see is something that may be familiar to many of you in any given commercial outlet where the person actually performing the sale needs quick access to cash, to give change, and then of course there needs to be an ordering to this, which is of course divided by denomination. But in my inquiry I also think of this as the color coding and and suddenly what it means to have these paper cups inside a very slick stainless steel box with actual currency, with actual banknotes in an exhibition. I also had another form of stainless steel work on the floor, on the wall. This one's called Spreading to Counting, and it is some form of self-portraiture, I would say. And the shape that you see at the top is coincidentally something I bought here in Boston in my visit when I did my exhibition at the ICA, and it is a wallet that looks just like this one that I'm still using to this day. And just once that it gets really worn, then I replace it with a new one. And then one day I unfolded it, and of course it told me the whole story of who I was somehow over that period of time. And then I thought maybe I should just continue using this kind of wallet. And one day I may show it somehow. So here we see like 7 years worth of me going through life. And this is just displayed in a stainless steel cabinet, just held up with magnets. This is of course the most recent one, and it's hardly worn. But if you go back to the first one, it's really worn. So there were a number of these cubes that had different material interventions. Sometimes I work very intuitively with materials that I bring back into my studio or objects that I buy. As Wonju clearly said, shopping is an extension of studio practice. And sometimes, as I said, I work rather intuitively, and sometimes it feels that the material is there or the object is there more to be used as a trope in my larger discourse. This, I don't think it needs much explanation. I think this is an exhibition that I think explained itself a lot in its use of materials. On the one hand, you had, of course, the slickness of stainless steel, which is a material that attracts me a lot because I find it, and we would all find it in public space, like in public toilets or in airports, and it's always quite close to the body, and it's very alien to the body also. And I guess that's why it's always close to the body, because it's very easy to wipe, and it repels somehow the traces of the body. So somehow I think that's why I was compelled to use this material in such a tactile way and make all these interventions that were where you could somehow feel my hands. This is a detail of work I will show later that also after this that involves again the display of an object. And this object is a series of magnets that just as I found them in a quite a rustic stationery shop in Mexico City, and I really love the way that they were already classified, and it was just very clear. I didn't really have to ask many questions. You had the larger ones and the smaller ones, and then the ones that were like a stick, and then those, but in a smaller format that looked like these beautiful, waves already, and somehow I thought that it looked like a constructivist assemblage rather than a display of magnets for sale. This piece is called Much to Many, and in the title I try to somehow allude to the fact that on the one hand, what is for sale or for display or at stake here is a force, is a magnetic force. But also it's that turned into a consumer article. That's where many somehow comes into play. Something that can be counted and accounted for, and ultimately domesticated and displayed and sold. So here you would see how the magnets are a little bit in disarray, and in both sides of the plexi, that's on in front of the box, and then beside it you would see the neat arrangement of them, kind of rationally made into a system. This is a work that's made after the enlargement of something I saw also in real life. And I thought, again, this is an object that I couldn't work out when I saw it, and I wanted to somehow extend this moment of intrigue onto the spectator and somehow enlarge it. So this is, like this size, and it has a big rock, and it's like this big punctuation mark that probably gives the feeling that the face is actually against the floor. And this becomes more evident in this other iteration of this work, which is actually standing, and from which you're able to see the other side. And then you work out there's something between the back and the front. and maybe the stone that's somehow canceling out function, but hopefully enabling meaning. This one's called Standing Points Made. And this one's called Pending Points Made. And by pending, I mean hanging. Often I try, when I title a work, to see whether that either leads the way into what I try to say or maybe unlocks something in the work. As you may already realize by now, this is an exhibition that was quite ambitious in its use of different materials. I worked with vacuum formed plastic and with just laser cut plastic, and also raw material like the stone and concrete and etc. And I guess the big effort in this exhibition was to try for all of this to remain well within and not become dispersed. This is a detail of these works. These works are called quick count. And again, like I said in the beginning, sometimes I try to be very intuitive about my ordering principles when it comes to the things I bring into my studio. In this case, I wanted to make these vacuum formed works where you can see the shape of a black bean, let's say, in different formations, which again are very pre-rational or very primal in their, just rows or lines, or like a unit against multiplicity. Then we go on to another one of these works in which there is this stainless steel surface that one may be familiar from, again, from public space like an airport. I saw one of these and wondered whether I could make an artwork out of it. This one's called Obtuse, Obtuse Right. And I'm trying to think of it as the title as a little bit as it's breaking down into a two-dimensional plane. So by obtuse, I mean nothing but the angle that the ridge on the far left expresses. And then by the comma, I meant all of these door wedges that I actually steal at every opportunity. So if you feel that there's one missing in one of the doors on this floor, I may have actually taken it. And then obtuse right, again, refers to the obtuse angle and the right angle. So I think sometimes I try to think very rationally where there is absurdity or where there's intuition, and vice versa. And part of my modus has to do with these inversion of rational and intuitive, or soft and hard, and these dialectical oppositions, and how they would probably merge into one work that I would hope is more than just the sum of its parts. This one's called Soft Still. And I guess it doesn't need much of an explanation either. I mean, on the one half, we have this table that's meant to allow for things to be in motion, and then on the other, it becomes more like the static half. And then I was thinking of, the curves and the motion and the ridges and all of these objects that I collect, and how they may suddenly rhyme with the surfaces. Again, I think the work in this exhibition is very tactile, and it probably wouldn't take. I was talking to one of you earlier about what it means to make a work that's participatory, where this audience actually is expected to take part and to touch and to maybe take home, and others in which that is somehow implied in the tactile memory that one may have, and it's actually not necessary. I'm not sure that it would really enrich the experience of this work to allow the audience to touch it. I think a lot of the materials and textures that I work with are familiar to most of us, I'm not really out there to create fantastical scenarios. I really like working with what's around me, what's available. Many times I find things and I just bring them into the studio. Many times I wish I found like a table of these exact dimensions, and because I didn't, then I have to have it fabricated. But again, I'm not trying to create like an unbelievable table of like strange, capacities or dimensions, but rather an object that looks perfectly credible as an object of industrial design and industrial production. These ones are called felt cards, and or data cards. And by data, again, it's something as simple as primal as just, pointing at different areas with these collected muscle shells. I guess in the same way that in the early days of data recording on cards, this coding was developed. Again, color coding, ordering principles, the tactile and material, and the creation of a system. This is something that I would hope sets my work in motion. Another one of these cubes, or boxes, as I said. And then rather than talking much about what these gestures imply, I thought if I could just jump from this one to this other one and make you feel like the coil and the texture, against this kind of vibrating waves, or these ripples, and then the black void. On the one hand, I work with forms and with materials that I think are familiar to most of us, but I would hope that I can just turn them around and make the spectator see something that was probably there, but he or she was unable to. Then we move on to another exhibition I had at the Aspen Art Museum, which was a little bit more of a revision of different aspects of my practice. Again, maybe by now you would see that I'm interested in ordering principles, and sometimes they are as simple and intuitive as just aligning a few objects that have nothing in common apart from the fact that they're cylindrical, or that they are containers, or that they are shiny, or maybe I do it by contrast, like an opaque one against a clear one that's able to reveal something while the other one is concealing something. And I would hope that my work comes across as being precise. I do acknowledge that I work with a variety of materials and a multiplicity of situations as well, but I wouldn't want my work to come across as one where anything goes. I think that, as I was discussing with some of you earlier, I think that in order for there to be art, for there to be meaning, there is a bond of trust, and also some sort of a form of contract between the work and the spectator. The work asks for something in order to give something in return, and something has to be set in motion. I think if the equation is balanced too much to either side, then there's probably no form of engagement. Like the work is too cryptic, and it really doesn't want to say much about itself, and then it fails to make the audience come in. Or on the other hand, which is always disappointing for me, when the artist actually says too much, or wants the work to say too much about itself, or assumes that the work knows enough about itself that then suddenly the audience has nothing to complete. And then as I said, that this contract becomes less of a form of engagement, and then doesn't set something in motion. I would want to think of sculpture as or sculptures as things that do something rather than just things that rest there in front of the spectator. And by doing something, I mean this in different moments and at different speeds. I think I'd feel very glad if a spectator stands in front of my work and then that triggers something about the way he or she would go, back onto the, leaving the gallery and then engage with, again, another stainless steel surface in a self-service restaurant, for instance. That is what I mean by the work doing something. And not just like a kind of private act of consumption that doesn't leave the gallery. I mean, all of my work comes from my first-hand experience of the world, of life, of material, of the world of exchange, the world of communication. And by making my work, I'm just trying to understand my passage through life and give my version of it, and hopefully, by me speaking in first person, singular, I would be able to also touch the spectator and tell the spectator something about him or herself. And this could be something as primal as the sensation of having one of these materials in one's pocket, or maybe something that taps more into the quotient of information that is in my works. Earlier with Wonju, I was talking about the way in which I always say that my work is both material and information, and it's never one without the other. I can never think of raw materials without layers of coding and branding. I think it's all a matter of degree. I can never think of a categorical distinction between between natural materials and man-made materials. I cannot conceive of such things as natural materials like without any intervention of human beings. Just the fact that we can name them already implies context and rules and history and power structures and language. And the fact that we can bring them into a gallery involves another set of values and mechanisms. So for me, as I said, the difference between a stone and a sales ticket is really just a matter of degree. It's not a categorical distinction. So for me, information is a content in the work that's just as important as material. And as a sculptor, I feel that I'm always working with both. One that is more informed with context, and the other which depends just on matter. This work, for instance, is called Extra Safe, and again, I think it's a work that explains itself in its use of materials. On the one hand, we have a piece that I made after repurposing a skip or a garbage dumpster into this shape. And then on the right, its right half, it's what could be seen as either a half-baked version of it or maybe like a younger version of it without all the weathering. And then in the middle of these two somewhat asymmetric halves, I nestled an inflated condom that in its brand, it was sold as Extra Safe. And in the context of this exhibition, I thought of this piece as being a piece about demography. I constantly think of the language of charts and the way that information and experience can be abstracted into shapes and ciphers or charts and then kind of explained back to us as such, and all that gets decanted in that process. Like experience and life and reality can be so full of contingency and so messy and full of interpretation, and yet we feel compelled to try to break it down to simple shapes or to numbers in order to communicate. Many times what I feel is that I have to bring it back again to the realm of objecthood and material. I think this is a clear example of what I've just said. This is something that could be thought of as a rubbish bin that's been segmented into different portions, let's say, and then it's filled. It's called empty cardboard box. Sorry, empty cardboard bin. And I like the fact that I could use the dividers of a cardboard box to fill something. So the dividers of a cardboard box are somehow not the content, but just the demarcations. So somehow I thought that I was pulling out somewhat empty space and then filling with that another empty space. So again, I try to set my work in motion a lot by these contradictions or paradoxes. Earlier I was talking to Wonju how the way by which material and information work with one another is not always an act of like cordial balance or dialogue, but sometimes one tries to cancel out the other. Like materials try to cancel out function. I think the work that you showed earlier with the avocados wrapped in the newspaper of the moon landing is a clear example how, you know, it's maybe not entirely true whether I want to show the information or conceal the information, but of course the information is important. Like, why is it a newspaper of the day after the moon landing and not just any given newspaper or any given piece of paper? Because of course, as we all know, what's wrapping the avocado and what would in this domestic way to make fruit ripen quickly, it's actually the temperature of the paper and not anything to do with the information that's printed on it. So, you know, it's one of the reflections that I try to set in motion by bringing material and information sometimes against one another. This is a detail of one of these works, which are these Gobbling Tapestries made in collaboration with these craftspeople in Guadalajara, in Mexico. And they take a really long time. They are made knot by knot in a very artisanal technique. But I always use as the source material tickets or flyers or whatnot that are produced by machines and are printed by machines that obviously have a certain matrix and a certain set of possibilities. And then I want these craftspeople to somehow become machines themselves. I don't allow them to make any interpretative decisions. I just say, please, what you see is exactly what you have to reproduce. So sometimes it feels like for every knot they make, there would be an equivalent little dot of ink or a little pixel. And of course the result is something that is large and warm and has a certain body to it, and also something that will be around for potentially hundreds of years because it's a technique that is physically very, very stable. However, I choose sources that are very ephemeral in their function. Like a lot of these tickets, you know, I would imagine that a lot of you have at least one of them in your pockets, and they have a certain value, and after, you know, they either go into our accounts or they just, you know, after the week they kind of lose their purpose, they go into the bin. In any case, the sources for these otherwise really long-lasting works are always tickets or flyers or whatnot that have a very limited time in their function. And they always come from transactions or moments in my life. As I said earlier, my pursuit is based completely on empiricism, on my experience. I'm not really an artist that goes into periods of research in libraries or in Wikipedia or online. But rather, I like to work from what comes to me or what happens to me, and that the materials that surround me. And the way that I can test these is most often physical, but also in what I could say are real life circumstances. Not by creating fictions or by referring to texts. These are still images of my exhibition at the Aspen Art Museum. I also work with collage, and there were a few of these collages that I made with the little labels that I peeled off the fruits that I consumed. And I think what happened there is probably not so different to what happened in the piece where I wrapped the avocados with the newspaper of the moon landing. Here, for instance, you could probably see that that ticket was jammed in the machine, and that's why we have this, these crippled lines at the top. And that is what ultimately made me choose that receipt in order to send it to the loom. There's obviously like I classify all of my tickets as they come to me for different properties. At one point I was really interested in the ones that had a terminating phrase at the end, like thank you or have a nice day. And there's of course the chronology. That's another way of classifying them. Sometimes I am interested in the ones that come at the end of the roll and they have this magenta stripe that tells the clerk to replace the roll soon. And then these 4 tickets have no other connection to one another. They're not connected in the kind of consumption nor in the month, but they're connected in that more chance property about them. So again, ordering principles are present all throughout my work. We can see that here. These are the paper wrappings that go around rows of coins of different denominations. And I started seeing, these started catching my eye, I think right about the same time that, in the earlier work that you saw the little cups with the different denomination banknotes. I think I saw this in a train where, as it happens also in airplanes, the space is very compact, so everything has to be ergonomically very smart. Like things have to be really within reach, and they have to be all classified in a way that they can be accessed quickly so that a certain function can be performed. So there was this person who had, a very nice and tight order in the way that the banknotes were laid out, and also there were the coins that were necessary for change, and then there was a gesture by which he or she, I can't remember whether it was a man or woman, but accessed these coins quickly. So I think he snapped them against the edge of the table and then unrolled them like that, and that of course created a certain shape of this skin once the coins were unwrapped, and that as a shape was interesting to me, and that of course I assumed would never be the same, even though you had the same amount of coins of the same denomination with the same color coding, you would never have this kind of hazardous shape twice. So I thought, I could start classifying these, and I started collecting them, and it took time, maybe a couple of years, for me to be able to come to this work, which is just like a sort of museum mount with a taxonomy of colored skins or objects. Coin wrappers. And then again, I made like different ways in which these could be organized. Then later on, I found these boards that I think are called directories. And normally, of course, you find them with the lines running horizontally so that you can make words with little plastic letters. In this case, I put it like that, and then I try to use them to classify, other little materials or other little units of communication. In this case, it was small change and cigarette butts. So on the one side, you have pennies and orange or yellow extinguished cigarette butts, and on the other you have nickels and white cigarette butts. Again, it's a kind of work that I think explains itself in just the inventory of the materials. This one, again, in order to understand it or to communicate or to unlock it, I think the title is important, and it's 1-on-1, like 1/1. And the size of it is roughly this. And this, shape of the black bean is again something I wish I had found in like a flea market or somewhere I didn't. So I had it fabricated by a prop maker, and I just said, I need this enlarged figure of a black bean as a very basic and primal unit of counting, just like a little bead or a little pebble would be. And I tried to develop it in such a way that it almost felt like I found it, like it was there. So a certain kind of didactic look to it. And then one day I found this stone disc, which I thought looked like kind of a big old coin. And then they came together. So 1-on-1. Here we go back to that installation view of the Aspen Art Museum. The work at the back is called Waiting, Giving, Spent. And I guess in its use of material and object is probably not far from what I try to do with the boxes, with the cubes in my recent exhibition. One of the things that attracts me the most about paper dispensers is the way that paper sits against stainless steel, like the really slick stainless steel and the very contrasting and more organic paper. So I often find myself making snapshots in public toilets and making people wonder what the hell am I doing? And then I brought 1, 2, 3, 4 of them into my studio, and then I had 2 of them enlarged, because I thought something in the enlargement may actually happen. And then of course it changes the ergonomy, like you reach, or you would feel like you would reach towards them in a different way than you would in the ones that you're more familiar with regards to the scale. Again, I think of these works both as a form of self-portraiture, like I did with the piece I showed in the beginning with my wallet unfolded, and also as a chart in which you have one object or one point and then a line that's describing flux or trajectory or connection, and then another object, and then that very simple physical experiment or demonstration of balance and tension is actually what's keeping the other material on the wall. This is not something that I rehearse and then once I like it I nail it on the wall. There's actually also a fair amount of trial and error in this simple way of attaching this light material onto the wall with the tension created between the two, the weight of the two objects on both ends of the string. I don't think I need to tell you what it is. 2 coconuts in a shopping bag, and then a bottle with clear liquid. Here there's a bottle of clear liquid, and then there's a line or a string that connects it to a bag of clear liquid, which is then kind of paired or tied against a bag of yellow liquid. that goes up to the nail again and then comes down and ends with a weight produced by a bottle of yellow liquid, of undisclosed liquid. This is an exhibition I made recently in Zurich, and I called it Product Testing Unit. And this is an idea that I wanted to somehow bring forward in one of my exhibitions, the idea of product testing. And it came both from just the simple fact of like bringing things into my studio and testing them somehow for their flexibility, for their resistance, for their rigidity, for their brightness, and also going into an IKEA shop and having this like this little display of a machine that I can't remember whether it pounded or pushed against a chair repeatedly and somehow fast-forwarded use. And it was showing you what the chair would be like after 5 years, maybe in a space of 1 day, you know, by a weight pressing down on it again and again and again. And I really love that concept. And then again, I looked online. This is, I guess, one of those times in which I did research a little, but I looked online and I found this really funny and telling ad in which there was a kind of absurd form of product testing in which this man was asked to like come in through a door and say, "Honey, I'm home," and then throwing himself onto the couch and then going out again, "Honey, I'm home," and doing it again and doing it again and again and again, and like for an hour. And that was a way of testing the resistance of the couch. And I thought again, I quite like this idea of fast forwarding something, fast forwarding time in order to test a material. Not just because of the physical wear, but also because of the act of repetition and what it implies in terms of life and ritual. I hardly ever take the price tags or the little labels off. This is a bit what the product testing unit looked like. Another thing I did, and I'm starting to do with some of my exhibitions, is I like suddenly bringing back a work from maybe 3, 4, 5 years before into actuality, because very often the way that we move in our practice, no sooner we finish setting up an exhibition and we are forced to be thinking forward into the next one. And it's really the audience that has more of a chance of engaging and reflecting upon what's there in the exhibition. And I feel that I'm forced to be thinking of the next one. And then there are a number of things that I set in motion with some works, and I feel it's fair to suddenly look back and bring them back and put them in dialogue with some of the things that I'm working with right at that moment. So that's what I did by bringing back this work, for instance, which is a conveyor belt that is advancing like this, and there's a can that's tumbling in the end, and it's a kind of energy drink. So you see the little flame and the word burn that's, you know, going to the end and to the end again, and it's this kind of a perpetual, kind of absurd motion that is then encased like it, you know, like it would be in a museum display. This is a work I made in 2007, and then all of the rest that you will see were made, or most of the rest that you will see were made for the exhibition. That piece in the bottom right is called Model for a Victory Parade. This one was the first time I worked with a table that had both a static component and also a rolling component. And on it I placed this piece of stone that I found with these cylindric holes running through it. And then 2 of them were broken. And I thought, or maybe not thought, but one day after 2 years of having it in my studio, I thought, okay, this is an invitation. So I inflated 2 ribbed condoms and I filled those gaps. And somehow I thought, okay, this is where it all comes together. Like cylindric empty space and the rollers and the air inside. I felt like everything was set in motion. Again, maybe by now I probably don't need to say much about this work. This is a found object, and I was a little intrigued as to what it was. So I decided to explore it with my little props. And I made this little classification of different sizes of mussel shells. And then I placed this consumed enlarged matchstick. This one's called CH-CHN. And it's almost like the inventory of its components. For CH, that stands for CH for Switzerland. So we have Swiss currency that is attached with a rubber band around the sticks. And for CHN, I just meant to say this is made in China. And it also has this, color coding, just like the banknotes. Yeah, banknotes are boring in this country because they're all green. So at the back of the show, there were a bit more works that were a bit lighter in touch. Again, here I constantly work with my with these door stoppers or door wedges. Yeah, rather than stoppers, I think of them as wedges, like these objects that find their place in this very uncomfortable space between 2 hard bodies, or hard surfaces, the floor and the door. And then, of course, I thought of this, the numbers that are indexing them or classifying them also have this shape. So again, going from shape to information, always important. Sometimes I walk into shops and the work is almost made for me. In this shop, I found these walking canes that were, classified by height and color coded, and in a display that spoke to me immediately. And then I thought, okay, I'll bring them home. And one day, I found a use for this curved ruler. And of course, my hope is that you wouldn't have to ask any questions, that you would just stand in front of it and feel the evidence somehow, the specificity. The diagonal leaning stick or line, and then the curved line, and the measuring, all of that kind of activating one work. Maybe this is a good transition between this and this. This was at the Venice Biennial of 2011, and that portion of work made with 2 bamboo canes was right at the dead center of the space, and it was meant to be like standing right at the center. And then it kind of dissected the volume or the vertical space in 2, and it was 2 canes that met in the middle, and in the middle they squashed a can of Coke Zero, that it became, just this flattened consequence of a cylinder. And it had a rather precarious balance. It really was a piece that you could easily just, with your elbow, knock down, and it miraculously stood there for the entire biennial, which is like 4 months long, and tens of thousands of visitors. For the biennial, I thought, and again, I'm trying to say how working with the context is also something I take into consideration. It's never the same to make an exhibition in a private gallery where the audience is a lot more, it's a captive audience. We think we know a lot more of how the audience will behave. But then again, in a biennial like Venice, one knows that there are thousands of visitors, and those thousands of visitors will have a very small amount of time to devote to each work. So it would somehow defeat the purpose to think that I could keep them in my space for an hour. So then I thought I need to present myself in a way which is very formal. By formal, I don't mean in terms of formality, but in terms of form, like just something that speaks very immediately, that you're able to walk in and intuit the forms and the, and the tension, and no need to read much, but rather to see and to work out the shapes and the materials and the lightness and the weight. That work on the right is called 3 Arrested Clouds, and it's composed, as you see, of 3 very large rocks. They are like this big, that are kind of lightly just hanging, let's say, on the wall, and then 3 rolled up socks that are just nestled between them two. Oh, here's one image that shows a little clearer how the can of Coca-Cola Zero is pressed between the two. You spoke earlier about arte povera.
Oh, right.
I think of a Coca-Cola Zero as a beautiful consequence of arte povera somehow. A zero that is not really zero. But I don't think the arte povera artists really came to understand or to convey what zero is. 3 Arrested Clouds again. I can't remember the title of this one, but it is 2 objects, 2 weights in tension. And then the box has somehow the proportion of a person. And it is both there to encapsulate, but also as a structure that allows for the string to sit. So, as you can see, I don't really don't like working with a lot of conventional supports. Like, I don't like framing my work, for instance, and I hate it when the works are cordoned off, or all of these kind of museum devices that, of course, bring about an added material, an added layer that I'm very often uncomfortable with. In this case, I thought, okay, if I have one of these cases, I will make the case a part of the work, a physical constituent of the work. So the plexi case is not just there to protect, but of course, if you took the case away, then the string would collapse. In a similar way to these. These are, you all know these IKEA baskets. Now we go on to, and I know I've bombarded you with a lot of images. We will be ending soon. We go on to an exhibition I made in Seoul in Korea a couple of years ago. And of course, I arrive in a place like Korea and I think, okay, I can work with some of the tropes of my vocabulary already, but would that actually have any effect? It's not that I want to be a different person or a different artist in all these different places I show, but in a sense, I want to establish a fruitful act of communication. And sometimes I feel like I know so very little about the place that I had to strip my work down to form and color and the most primal kind of ordering principles. And here, other than, material intention and then balance and leaning and reflection, I thought if that comes across, that's enough. This one's called compromised vertical growth. And you could think of it as again, in the language of charts. These ones are called collapsible mountains. And then there are these other marble works that are leaning against the wall and then holding certain objects between them. This is a cup that I got in the airplane on Korean Air. And then, again, I like working with banknotes and currency. And then we go on to the penultimate project. This is, again, an event visited by thousands of people. It's a Frieze art fair, and I thought I was invited to do a project. And I thought, okay, in an art fair, there are thousands of visitors. It's in a closed space where no one is allowed to smoke. So I knew that lots of these people would find themselves coming to a point where they had to either, smoke the last few drags of their fag, or maybe be forced to go out and smoke there and stub out their cigarettes. So I thought, okay, this is something I can count on. I won't have to force people to smoke. I know that it will happen. And I would like to make a sculpture that incorporates both this circumstance and naturally also the material. So I took the ashtrays away and I put sculptures instead. And then it only took a couple of people to stub out their cigarette on one of the sculptures for the rest to follow. And again, this is a piece that's composed of like a hard element and a soft element, neither of which is more important than the other. And then we go on to this last project, which I did for the Berlin Biennial in 2008. And it's called Items in Care of Items. By items, the first items, I mean these items. And by the second items, I mean these soft items. And I will tell you. And in care of goes back to this idea that I was hinting at earlier about a bond of trust or a contract between the spectator and the work. I like it when I feel that I stand in front of a work and the work spells out the rules by which I should engage, and these rules are open enough that make me want to engage, and I get something out. I bring something back, but I also feel like I had to give something in order to set something in motion. So in this case, this happened in the Neue National Gallery in Berlin, which is a beautiful building designed by Mies van der Rohe. And it has this very large open space on the foyer area, on the ground floor area, with two units like that you see at the back that were thought of to be the code check for all the different functions and exhibitions and etc. And they are part of the architecture. And as I was doing my research trips, I observed the functioning of these and how all these soft bodies, all these coats and bags came in and they were indexed and then they went out, and then they created this changing larger shape or larger organism. And I thought, what if I bring that into the gallery rather than having it on the sides of the gallery, somewhere that we know is accessible, but it's also not there to be looked at as a piece of art. What if I bring that into the center? So I devised these shapes that are very resistant. They're made of metal, and they're very sturdy. And also they had these shapes and curves that I thought would maybe invite for that gesture of stuffing in or hanging or draping over different garments. I mean, just like you have decided to put your bottle right next to the leg of the chair, or put your notebook on your legs, like that, for me is a sort of gesture that I like observing, and I try to recreate, or I try to invite for in my work, because I know that it happens. It's part of the sculpture of everyday life somehow. So I devised these shapes, and very importantly, I cancelled out the function of the coat-check booths, and I transferred that function onto my sculptures. So 2 attendants of the biennial were there, identified with their badges, and when people came in to see the biennial and they wanted to check their bag in or their coat in, they came to the attendant, they trusted that their item would be looked after, and they were given a little number to claim it afterwards. And then the gallery attendant somehow continuously made the sculpture. If you saw the shapes in the morning before the gallery opened like this, there was no art. For me, this was not the artwork. The artwork only started when the system started. And this was not a system that was alien to anyone. It was exactly the same as the one you carry out when you leave your bag in the, where there's a counter and the pegs where things are hung, except in this case, they became part of this collective sculpture that was changing constantly. Sometimes you had a group of people that came at the same time and left at the same time, so naturally they only needed one tag. So then number 231 referred to this bundle of clothes, and sometimes it was just one. So all of these things, all of these ordering principles become an important part of the work of the system. And again, an exhibition with a really vigorous flow of people, where I knew lots of people would come in, and lots of people would have to leave their item behind because they wanted to walk comfortably around the exhibition. So you had a lot of expected and unexpected shapes, and then even something like this, which I promise I didn't stage. Someone did come in with a baby and said, what can we do? And we said, just leave the baby here. It is going to be number 43, just don't lose your tag. And that is the last image. Please take a moment and breathe, and I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you for listening.
Questions? It doesn't have to be just for a little bit.
Take a moment, yes. I know I bombarded you with... Yeah, we need to have the light.
Somebody in the lights back there? Isn't it on the other side? Not the projector. Huh? It's over there. Okay, this is good.
Is it on?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Is it on? Yeah. Questions?
It seems like text is such an integral part of your practice, especially in the earlier images that you showed us. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about how titles act as text to inform or activate pieces of the animation.
Do you mean text as printed information, or text as when I add that titling, or?
Maybe both, aesthetically and just as
Well, well, as I said, I can never think of my work as either just material or just information. But it's a tension between them. Sometimes information is just quite explicitly printed information, like the information printed on the newspaper or on the tickets. Or even when I said I never take the price tags off, you know, that bit of information, that text, if you want to call it, is it informs the work. It makes it, you know, what it is. And then there's, of course, the moment when I decide that I need to set something in motion by giving a title to a piece. Many times it's also me trying to come to terms with whether I have finished it or whether I understand it. Like when I made these works with the insulating roll and the object and then the string and the other object, when the moment came that I had to title them, I found myself making line drawings. And then I also find myself trying to explain them with words, not giving them away or justifying or explaining them, but somehow setting them in motion with words. So that's again another moment in which, as you say, text serves to set something in motion. Something that works with the material, sometimes against the material, but hopefully it activates. And yes, words, text, information are very important components, or I guess a force in the work. My work is not mute. I have a desire to communicate. And there are many things that I don't exactly understand and I cannot explain with words. But then I come around somehow. But I'm certainly not an artist who is unwilling to articulate. And many times the inspiration to make something with material comes from something I heard or something I read that suddenly resonates in a piece of material or in a shape, you know? Yep.
Yeah, I just have like funny question about the piece, pieces sort of becoming these ashtrays.
Mm-hmm.
So do you like go and just put out a couple bucks and people start doing it, or did it happen organically? I mean,
it takes the first person or two to do it. There were two of them that were right at the entrance, and at the entrance there's always a security guard. And very often, the security guard is smoking. And I think one of them may have asked, like, where are the ashtrays? And I said, and it was him. And maybe in the beginning it's a little bit of a shy involvement, but it's funny how when it gets set in motion, it just picks up exponentially. And then you don't have to say anymore because I tapped into something that I knew would happen. You know, people were standing there wondering where they could do it, and then as soon as they see the sign, and it came from observing these little ghettos of smokers outside office buildings. I did that for a couple of years, thinking like, you know, how sad that these people have to form this kind of parallel society and pretend that they have something to say to one another, and are just smoking like and smiling, and sometimes it feels like they don't want to be there, standing with others. That situation, that moment, I found significant. I wanted to kind of explore that, but also I loved the fact that the material evidence of that moment was sometimes really amazing, and sometimes there was a corner where you could see the insistence of the burn and the burn and the burn, and then suddenly there was this beautiful trace. So that I tried somehow to capture, to recreate, and these collective gestures, they begin almost spontaneously, and then they just invite and continue. So it's the number of people. I couldn't expect that to happen in a private gallery, because you would have to somehow stage it or tell people what to do. In a place where there are thousands of people visiting, that there will be thousands of smokers. So easier that way.
Two questions, but kind of separate. That's a good big one. It's kind of going back to my question is not necessarily about text, it's about language. And I can kind of like simply, you are I was just asking you and Francis, what language, is a common language that you guys speak at home with your two kids, and your children are trilingual, and you are French, Spanish, and English. I wonder what it is to kind of look, how your ability to speak three languages and perhaps have three words related, obviously, but these three particular languages, how that kind of influences the way you look at things in the world. And I don't only mean like in terms of like words, that there are three words, but also you come from multiple positions to look at the same thing that might have like the same function, but then in different contexts. It's better.
Well, I mean, this is a very old, somewhat unresolved philosophical question. Like, what comes first, thought or the word for it? We are not sure. Sometimes the word is in English, sometimes it's in Spanish, and I'm not sure what comes first, whether the word or the thought. And
you step from a very particular position because you are trilingual, and that your mother tongue is not it's not what you hear on a normal daily basis because you live in Brussels.
Well, I speak French, but I never work in French. I don't have a command of French that really is enough for me to go on to that level. So I would say I just oscillate between Spanish and English when it comes to making my work and when it comes to informing my work. And just because of a quite circumstantial reason. I come from, Spanish is my mother tongue, and then English is the language that a lot of us speak when we want to understand one another. So it's really that. It's not exactly pragmatic, it's just, it is what it is. And, we are in an occupation that, as some sort of privilege, allows us to go to a different country and carry our work with us. So I think that's something I enjoy about being an artist. I can go anywhere with my work. Sometimes what I present contains words and information, sometimes it doesn't, but I think it's always there somehow. But it could be anywhere. It's not language specific, it's not language defined, like in the way that a poet or a journalist would have to have the work translated into a different language in order to be able to work or to function elsewhere. I think we could talk for hours about this. In different languages as well.
I always think that there's a certain kind of way, not necessarily just artists, but like people that are in this part of it, will kind of look at their relationship to things outside of their head that is particular. So.
I had a question. I like the fact that you use a lot of objects that you come in contact with and like found objects. So I'm just wondering how it is that you get the viewer to care about these objects. Is it the way that you present them? Is it the way that you talk about them? Because I'm just curious, because I feel like found objects are some of the hardest things to work with, just because they're like dead giveaways. So how is it that you get people to care, like at the Venice Biennial?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question because I don't think I have a formula for it. But when I feel like I finished the work, then I get the feeling that, okay, I may actually make people care for this because of the way, the light I'm throwing on it. But what I can say is, maybe in my method, I'm not someone who collects a lot of stuff and brings a lot of stuff into the studio. And it just accumulates. I don't want to say that about the world. Like we're just inundated with stuff. What I want to say more has to do a lot more with specificity. Like anything that comes into my studio already has, there's quite a process of filtering and decanting, and that thing is already a candidate, I think, because it talked to me. I don't work with anything and everything. I would like my work to feel much more precise. And I also like to think that I surrender myself to the object and I let the object speak for itself. Sometimes I have nothing to add, and if I feel that just by bringing that or changing the context or turning it upside down, there's something new or something that makes you pay attention, then I feel I'm lucky. I'm not lucky, but I succeeded maybe. Again, it's a very good question, and it's one that I ask myself all the time, not in a way that would make me self-conscious or would make the things also feel self-conscious. Because I think that one would be able to transmit that to the thing. I was saying earlier, I don't like it when I go to an exhibition and I see that the artist knows too much about the object. The object already knows too much about itself. Then, why do I need to be there to create the meaning? You know what I mean? And of course, making art, I don't always make art with found objects or existing objects, but making art with things like this, it's one of the challenges. Like these things exist already and they already have a meaning, and we can all project our own meanings and our own stories and etc. Like how can I somehow prioritize my point of view over anyone else's and turn this into an artwork and make it sustain as an artwork? I think transformation and sustenance are really what make an artwork. Sometimes you probably just grab a bundle of clay and transform something into, and whether that is able to really stay being an artwork is another challenge.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.